More than 2,500 years ago, in the heart of the Indian subcontinent, a child was born amidst a world in transformation. It was a time of great social and spiritual upheaval, known as the period of the Mahajanapadas, 16 great kingdoms that dominated the political landscape of the era. During this time, Indian society was rigidly stratified by the caste system. At the top were the Brahmins, the guardians of sacred knowledge and performers of rituals. Below them were the Kshatriyas, the warrior and ruling caste. It was within this stratum that Prince Siddhartha Gautama, the future Buddha, was born. The Ganges Valley buzzed with new ideas and questioning. The traditional Vedic system, with its elaborate rituals and sacrifices, was beginning to be challenged. Sages and philosophers, known as Shramanas, wandered through forests and villages, proposing new paths to spiritual liberation. Among these revolutionary thinkers were figures like Mahavira, the founder of Jainism, who preached absolute nonviolence and the pursuit of soul purification through rigorous ascetic practices. Others, like Ajitesa Kambali, proposed materialistic views, denying the existence of the soul and life after death. It was within this cauldron of ideas that one day, King Suddhodana, ruler of the Shakya clan, convened a great debate at his palace. Sages from all traditions were invited to discuss the great questions of existence. What is the nature of reality? Is there a purpose to life? How can we attain liberation from suffering? The debate stretched on for days, with heated arguments and displays of erudition. Some defended the supremacy of the Vedas, while others proposed new philosophical paths. In the midst of this discussion, a young Brahmin named Kondana stood out. With a calm yet firm voice, he said, "Venerable sages, listen to me. I see great wisdom in many of your words, but I also sense that we are all groping in the dark. Perhaps the truth we seek cannot be found solely in books or rituals. Perhaps a new path is needed, a new light to illuminate our understanding." His words brought a reflective silence to the hall. King Suddhodana, impressed, asked, "And where, young sage, might we find this new light?" Kondana smiled gently and replied, "I do not know, Your Majesty, but I have a feeling that it will soon emerge, perhaps closer than we imagine." Little did Kondana know that, at that very moment, Queen Maya, Suddhodana's wife, was pregnant with the being who would bring this new light to the world, the future Buddha. This was the world into which Siddhartha Gautama was born, a world of entrenched traditions, but also deep questioning and a search for new spiritual paths. A world ready for a revolution in thought that would forever transform the spiritual course of humanity. On the full moon night of the month of Vesakha, Queen Maya had an extraordinary dream. In her dream, a majestic white elephant with 6 tusks descended from the heavens, carrying a lotus flower in its trunk. The elephant circled the queen 3 times before entering her womb through her right side. The next morning, Queen Maya, radiant, shared her dream with King Suddhodana. Intrigued, the king summoned 64 of the most renowned Brahmins in the kingdom to interpret the dream. After long deliberations, they reached a unanimous conclusion. The queen would give birth to an extraordinary child, destined either to become a great king who would unify all of India, or an enlightened one who would show the path to liberation for all of humanity. As the pregnancy progressed, mysterious events began to occur throughout the kingdom. Trees bloomed out of season, rivers flowed with crystal-clear waters, and a sense of peace and contentment seemed to envelop all of nature. The sages of the kingdom interpreted these signs as omens of the birth of an extraordinary being. When the time for the birth drew near, following the custom of the time, Queen Maya decided to return to her parents' home to give birth. On the way, the royal entourage passed through the beautiful Lumbini Grove. Enchanted by the beauty of the place, the queen asked to take a rest. As she walked among the blossoming trees, Queen Maya felt the moment of birth had arrived. She leaned against a large sal tree, her hands grasping a flowering branch. At that moment, without pain or effort, Prince Siddhartha was born. It is said that upon his birth, the baby took 7 steps in each of the cardinal directions, and with each step, a lotus flower bloomed from the ground to support his feet. Then, pointing to the sky with one hand and to the earth with the other, the newborn proclaimed in a clear voice, "Above the heavens and below the heavens, I alone am the honored one." News of the miraculous birth spread quickly. From all corners of the kingdom, people flocked to see the baby prince. Among them was the venerable ascetic Asita, renowned for his wisdom and clairvoyant powers. Upon seeing the baby, Asita carefully examined the 32 auspicious signs on his body, marks that, according to ancient scriptures, indicated a being destined for greatness. The sage saw the wheel of Dharma on the prince's palms and soles, his long graceful arms and eyes deep as lakes of wisdom. With tears in his eyes, Asita bowed before the baby and said to King Suddhodana, "Rejoice, O king, for a noble being has been born into your house. If he remains in the world, he will be a great ruler, uniting all the kingdoms under his just rule. But if he renounces worldly life, he will become a Buddha, an awakened one, who will enlighten the world with his wisdom." Hearing these words, King Suddhodana felt a mixture of joy and apprehension. He was determined to ensure that his son would follow the path of a great ruler, not that of a renunciant. Little did he know that the young prince's destiny was already written in the stars, a destiny that would change the spiritual course of human history. The joy of Prince Siddhartha's birth was soon overshadowed by great sorrow. 7 days after giving birth, Queen Maya, frail and exhausted, passed away. King Suddhodana, devastated by the loss, entrusted the care of the young prince to Maya's sister, Mahapajapati Gautami, who raised Siddhartha as her own son. Growing up in the luxurious palace of Kapilavastu, Siddhartha enjoyed a privileged childhood. The king, mindful of Asita's prophecy, was determined to shield his son from anything that might lead him toward a spiritual path. He surrounded the prince with every imaginable pleasure and comfort, hoping to keep him firmly anchored in the material world. From an early age, Siddhartha showed extraordinary intelligence and compassion. It is said that as a child, during a plowing festival, he wandered away from his caretakers and was found meditating under a jambu tree. While everyone around him was caught up in the festivities, the young prince had naturally entered a state of deep contemplation. As he grew older, Siddhartha received the finest education the kingdom could offer. He studied the Vedic scriptures, the art of warfare, politics, and philosophy. In all fields, he excelled, quickly surpassing his teachers. His sharp mind questioned everything, always seeking a deeper understanding. One day, during an archery lesson, the instructor challenged the young princes to hit a distant target. Many tried, but none succeeded. When it was Siddhartha's turn, he gracefully took the bow, focused intensely, and released the arrow. To everyone's amazement, the arrow not only hit the target, but pierced through it entirely, continuing its flight until it disappeared from view. Impressed, the instructor asked, "Prince, how did you achieve such a feat?" Siddhartha calmly replied, "I focused not only on the target, but beyond it. I saw not only what is visible, but the invisible as well." This enigmatic answer left everyone intrigued, revealing the depth of the young prince's thinking. Despite his excellence in all martial and intellectual arts, Siddhartha always showed a tendency toward kindness and contemplation. He was often found alone in the palace gardens, observing nature or lost in deep reflection. Concerned by his son's introspective tendencies, King Suddhodana intensified his efforts to keep Siddhartha engaged in worldly matters. He organized elaborate feasts, dance performances, and music presentations, always trying to distract the prince from his deeper thoughts. Yet, even amid all the luxury and entertainment, something seemed to be missing for Siddhartha. He frequently questioned his tutors about the purpose of life, the nature of suffering, and the meaning of existence. Questions for which no one in the palace seemed to have satisfactory answers. As Siddhartha approached adulthood, his inner conflict deepened. On one hand, he felt deep love and respect for his father and his people, understanding his responsibilities as the crown prince. On the other hand, he felt an inexplicable calling, a yearning for something beyond the palace's golden walls. Little did he know that soon, unexpected events would force him to confront the truths his father had worked so hard to conceal, forever changing the course of his life and the history of humanity. As Siddhartha approached adulthood, King Suddhodana became increasingly anxious to secure his son's future as a ruler. He believed that marriage would be the final step to ground Siddhartha in worldly life, steering him definitively away from any ascetic inclinations. The king then organized a Swayamvara, a traditional ceremony where the bride chooses her husband from among several suitors. Princesses from all the neighboring kingdoms were invited, but Siddhartha's eyes were immediately drawn to a young woman of radiant beauty and noble bearing, Yasodhara, princess of the Koliya kingdom. However, Yasodhara's father, concerned by the rumors of Siddhartha's contemplative nature, required the prince to prove his worth in a competition of skills. The challenges included archery, horseback riding, swimming, and debates on philosophy and politics. To everyone's surprise, Siddhartha not only matched the other competitors in physical prowess, but surpassed them. In the archery contest, he broke the bow that was given to him, finding it too weak, and requested his grandfather's legendary bow, which no one else could wield. With it, he struck a target so distant that no one else could even see it. But it was in the philosophical debate that Siddhartha truly shone. When asked about the nature of reality, he replied, "Reality is like a river, always in flux, never the same in 2 moments. What we call the self is like a whirlpool in this river, seemingly stable but constantly changing. True wisdom lies in recognizing this impermanence and living in harmony with it." His words left the assembly in contemplative silence. Yasodhara, impressed not only by his skills but by his profound wisdom, chose Siddhartha as her husband, placing the garland of flowers around his neck. The wedding was celebrated with great pomp, lasting 7 days and 7 nights. King Suddhodana, overjoyed, provided the couple with a palace for each season of the year, each one more luxurious than the last. In the years that followed, Siddhartha and Yasodhara lived amidst unimaginable splendor. There was constant music, elaborate dances, sumptuous feasts, and every pleasure that wealth could provide. The king ensured that his son was always occupied with matters of state, feasts, and entertainment, hoping to keep him distracted from troubling thoughts about the nature of existence. For a time, Siddhartha seemed content with this life. He was a loving husband to Yasodhara and diligently fulfilled his duties as a prince. However, those close to him noticed moments of deep introspection when his eyes seemed to look beyond the golden walls of the palace, as if searching for something that no amount of luxury could provide. One night, after an especially extravagant feast, Siddhartha found himself alone in his quarters, gazing at the full moon. Yasodhara found him there and, concerned, asked, "My love, what troubles your mind? Do we not have everything we could ever wish for?" Siddhartha looked at her tenderly and replied, "We have everything, and yet I feel we are missing the most essential. There is an emptiness that no wealth can fill, a question that no pleasure can answer." Yasodhara, sensing the depth of her husband's unrest, embraced him in silence. Both of them knew, though they could not put it into words, that a great change was coming. Siddhartha's restlessness grew with each passing day. Despite his father's efforts to keep him satisfied within the palace walls, the prince yearned to see the world beyond them. Finally, he convinced his loyal charioteer, Channa, to take him on secret excursions through the city. On the first of these journeys, as the chariot traveled through the streets, Siddhartha saw something he had never seen before. An old man, bent under the weight of years, walking with difficulty, supported by a cane. Intrigued, Siddhartha asked Channa, "Who is that man? Why is his body so bent and his skin so wrinkled?" Channa, surprised by the question, replied, "That, my prince, is simply an old man. All of us, if we live long enough, grow old like that." Siddhartha was deeply disturbed. "All of us? Even me?" he asked, touching his own youthful face. "Yes, my prince. Old age spares no one," Channa answered sadly. On their second outing, Siddhartha encountered a man lying by the roadside, groaning in pain, his body covered in sores. "What afflicts this man?" the prince asked, his heart heavy with compassion. "He is sick, my prince. Illness, like old age, is a condition we are all subject to," Channa explained. Siddhartha spent the rest of the day in silence, contemplating the fragility of health that he had always taken for granted. On the third journey, the chariot passed a funeral procession. Siddhartha saw a lifeless body being carried on a bier, followed by mourners weeping. "And this, Channa? What has happened to this man?" Siddhartha asked, though he dreaded the answer. "He has died, my prince. This is the final fate of all living beings," Channa replied, his voice low and reverent. Siddhartha felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. The reality of death, which he had never before confronted, struck him with full force. On the fourth and final outing, something unexpected happened. Siddhartha saw a man sitting in meditation under a tree. His face was serene, radiating a peace that the prince had never seen before. "And this man, Channa? Who is he?" Siddhartha asked, his voice filled with admiration. "He is an ascetic, my prince, someone who has renounced worldly pleasures in search of deeper truths," Channa explained. For the first time since these journeys began, Siddhartha felt a spark of hope. "Is there, then, a path beyond the suffering I've seen?" he asked, more to himself than to Channa. Upon returning to the palace after this final encounter, Siddhartha was profoundly changed. The veils of illusion that had shielded him for so long were now torn away. He saw clearly the truths his father had worked so hard to hide, the inevitability of aging, sickness, and death. But he also saw the possibility of transcendence, embodied by the serene ascetic. That night, while everyone slept, Siddhartha made a decision that would not only change his life, but the spiritual history of humanity. He resolved to leave the palace, his life of luxury, his beloved wife, and his newborn son, to seek answers to the fundamental questions of existence that now consumed him. On the full moon night of the month of Asalha, Siddhartha made his final decision. With a heavy yet resolute heart, he quietly entered the chambers where Yasodhara slept beside their newborn son, Rahula. Gazing at the sleeping faces of his wife and child, Siddhartha felt a deep sorrow. "Forgive me," he whispered. "I must leave to find a path that will free all beings from suffering. One day I will return with the truth I seek." Without making a sound, Siddhartha summoned his loyal charioteer, Channa, and asked him to saddle his horse, Kantaka. Under the cover of night, the three of them departed from the palace, passing silently through the city gates. At dawn, they reached the banks of the Anoma River. There, Siddhartha dismounted, and in a symbolic gesture of renunciation from his former life, he cut his long hair with his own sword. He removed his jewelry and royal garments, exchanging them for a simple ochre robe offered by a passing hunter. "Channa," Siddhartha said, "take Kantaka back to the palace. Tell my father and Yasodhara not to worry. I promise I will return, but only after I have found the truth I seek." With tears in his eyes, Channa pleaded, "My prince, please allow me to accompany you on this journey." Siddhartha smiled gently. "Your loyalty touches me, my friend. But this is a path I must walk alone. Take care of my family in my absence." With one last glance at the life he was leaving behind, Siddhartha crossed the Anoma River. On the other side, he was no longer a prince, but a seeker of truth. A samana, a wandering ascetic. Meanwhile, at the palace, the news of Siddhartha's departure caused great distress. King Suddhodana, devastated, sent messengers in all directions to find his son. Yasodhara, though deeply saddened, understood the magnitude of her husband's quest. Thus began Siddhartha's spiritual journey, a journey that would lead him through great trials and ultimately to enlightenment, transforming him into the Buddha, the awakened one. After leaving his princely life behind, Siddhartha embarked on an intense journey of spiritual seeking. His first steps led him to two renowned masters of the time, Alara Kalama and Uddaka Ramapuda. With Alara Kalama, Siddhartha learned the art of deep meditation, reaching elevated states of consciousness. He quickly mastered everything Kalama had to teach, attaining what his teacher called the sphere of nothingness. However, Siddhartha felt that this was still not enough to end suffering. He then sought the teachings of Uddaka Ramapuda, who took him even further into the realms of meditation, reaching the state known as the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. Once again, Siddhartha quickly reached his master's level, but still felt that true liberation had not been achieved. Grateful yet unsatisfied, Siddhartha left his teachers and decided to seek the truth on his own. He then joined a group of 5 ascetics who practiced extreme austerities in the forest of Uruvela. Believing that mortifying the body could lead to the liberation of the spirit, Siddhartha threw himself into severe ascetic practices. He fasted for long periods, sometimes eating only a single grain of rice a day. He exposed himself to the elements, remaining motionless under the scorching sun and freezing rain. He held his breath until he nearly fainted and meditated for hours on end without moving. His fellow ascetics admired his fierce determination. Over time, Siddhartha's body became skeletal, his skin darkened and clung to his bones, and his hair began to fall out. He was so weak that he could barely stand. One day, while meditating by a river, Siddhartha overheard a conversation between a music teacher and his student, who were passing by in a boat. The teacher said, "If the string is too tight, it will break. If it is too loose, it won't produce sound. The correct tuning is in the middle." These words struck a deep chord with Siddhartha. He realized that he had pushed his efforts to the extreme, just as he had once lived in extreme luxury. Neither path had led him to the truth he sought. At that moment, a young village girl named Sujata passed by, and seeing Siddhartha's pitiful state, offered him a bowl of rice and milk. Siddhartha accepted the offering, to the horror of his fellow ascetics, who considered him weak and abandoned him. Regaining his strength with the nourishment, Siddhartha reflected deeply on his journey. He realized that neither the life of luxury nor extreme austerity was the path to enlightenment. There had to be a middle way, a balanced path between indulgence and mortification. With this new understanding, Siddhartha decided to abandon the extreme ascetic practices. He bathed in the Niranjana River, accepted food offerings from the local villagers, and regained his health. Physically and mentally strengthened, Siddhartha was ready for the final stage of his quest. He approached a nearby banyan tree, which would later become known as the Bodhi tree. There he made a solemn vow. "Let my skin, my nerves, and my bones dry up. Let all the flesh and blood in my body be exhausted. But I will not move from this place until I have attained supreme and complete enlightenment." Thus began the final meditation that would lead Siddhartha to enlightenment and transform him into the Buddha, the awakened one. Sitting under the banyan tree, later known as the Bodhi tree, Siddhartha entered deep meditation. His resolve was unshakable. He would not rise until he had attained complete enlightenment. As night fell, Siddhartha was confronted by Mara, the lord of illusion and death. Mara, fearing that Siddhartha might escape his grasp, unleashed all kinds of temptations and threats upon him. First, Mara sent his demonic armies, who hurled flaming arrows at Siddhartha. But through the power of his compassion, the arrows turned into flower petals as they touched him. Next, Mara sent his 3 daughters, Tanha, desire, aversion, and Raga, passion, to seduce Siddhartha. However, he remained unmoved, seeing through the illusory nature of their forms. Frustrated, Mara challenged Siddhartha's right to seek enlightenment. "What right do you have to sit upon the throne of enlightenment? What great deeds have you accomplished?" Unshaken, Siddhartha reached down and touched the earth with his right hand, calling it to witness his countless lifetimes of preparation for this moment. The earth rumbled in response, affirming his right. Defeated, Mara withdrew, and Siddhartha sank into deeper and deeper levels of meditation. During the first watch of the night, he developed the ability to recall his past lives, seeing the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth to which all beings are bound. In the second watch, he gained the divine eye, allowing him to see how beings are reborn according to the nature of their actions, karma. In the third and final watch of the night, at dawn, Siddhartha penetrated the deepest nature of reality. He understood the origin of suffering and the path to its cessation. In that moment, he realized the 4 noble truths: the truth of suffering, dukkha; the truth of the origin of suffering, samadaya; the truth of the cessation of suffering, nirodha; and the truth of the path to the cessation of suffering, magga. With this realization, the last veils of ignorance were lifted. Siddhartha Gautama had become the Buddha, the awakened one. He had reached nirvana, a state beyond birth and death, beyond suffering and illusion. It is said that at this moment, the earth quaked, a brilliant light illuminated the world, and flowers rained from the sky. The Buddha remained seated under the Bodhi tree for 7 days, absorbing the depth of his realization. In the days that followed, he pondered whether or not to share his discovery with the world. The truth he had realized was profound and subtle, difficult to comprehend for minds shrouded in ignorance. For a moment, he considered remaining silent. But then, moved by great compassion for all beings who suffer, the Buddha decided that he must teach. He understood that, just as there were beings with much dust in their eyes, unable to see the truth, there were also those with little dust, who could understand if they heard his teachings. Thus, the Buddha rose from the Bodhi tree, ready to share the path of liberation with the world. His first intention was to seek out his former teachers, Alara Kalama and Udaka Ramaputta, but he learned that both had passed away. So he decided to seek out the 5 ascetics with whom he had practiced austerities, beginning his mission to spread the Dharma, the teaching of truth, that would continue for the next 45 years of his life. Determined to share his discovery, the Buddha set out for Sarnath, near Varanasi, where he knew he would find the 5 ascetics with whom he had practiced austerities. When they saw him approaching, the ascetics initially decided to ignore him, believing that he had abandoned the spiritual path. However, as the Buddha drew nearer, they were overcome by a sense of peace and serenity emanating from him. Intrigued, the ascetics listened as the Buddha explained that he had found a middle way between the indulgence of sensual pleasures and extreme self-mortification. This path, he said, led to peace, higher insight, enlightenment, and nirvana. It was then that the Buddha delivered his first formal sermon, known as the Dhamma Kakappavatthana Sutta, or the setting in motion of the wheel of Dharma. In this discourse, he introduced the 4 noble truths and the noble eightfold path. The 4 noble truths are the truth of suffering, dukkha, the truth of the origin of suffering, samudaya, the truth of the cessation of suffering, nirodha, and the truth of the path to the cessation of suffering, magga. The Noble Eightfold Path, which constitutes the 4th noble truth, consists of right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Upon hearing these teachings, Kondana, one of the 5 ascetics, attained the first stage of enlightenment, becoming a stream enterer. He asked to become a disciple of the Buddha, thus forming the beginning of the Sangha, the community of Buddhist practitioners. In the days that followed, the other 4 ascetics also attained the first stage of enlightenment and joined the Sangha. The Buddha continued to instruct them, and eventually all 5 attained the state of arahant, full enlightenment. Soon after, a young nobleman named Yasa, disillusioned with worldly life, approached the Buddha seeking guidance. After hearing the teachings, Yasa too attained enlightenment and joined the Sangha. His friends and family, impressed by Yasa's transformation, also came to hear the Buddha, and many became followers. As the community grew, the Buddha sent his first 60 disciples in different directions to spread the Dharma, with the famous words, "Go, O monks, for the welfare of the many, for the happiness of the many, out of compassion for the world. Let not 2 of you go the same way." Meanwhile, the Buddha returned to Uruvela, where he converted 3 ascetic brothers and their 1,000 followers. He then traveled to Rajagaha, the capital of the kingdom of Magadha, where King Bimbisara became an important patron of the Dharma. It was during this period that 2 of the Buddha's most prominent disciples joined the Sangha, Sariputta and Moggallana. Both quickly attained enlightenment and became the Buddha's chief disciples. Thus, in a short time, the Buddha established a vibrant community of practitioners, laid the foundations of his teachings, and began attracting followers from all walks of life. The wheel of Dharma had been set in motion, sparking a spiritual revolution that would spread throughout India and eventually much of the world. After attaining enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, Siddhartha Gautama, now known as Buddha, the Enlightened One, dedicated the next 45 years of his life to teaching and wandering through the northern regions of India. His journeys led him to interact with people from all castes and backgrounds, from kings and merchants to farmers and outcasts. During these 4.5 decades, Buddha established the Sangha, community of practitioners, and codified his teachings, known as Dharma. His pilgrimages were not only physical, but also spiritual, as each encounter became an opportunity to spread wisdom and compassion. One of the most striking stories from this period is the conversion of the bandit Angulimala. This man, whose name means necklace of fingers, was feared by all due to his practice of murdering travelers and collecting their fingers. When Angulimala attempted to attack Buddha, he was confronted with an unshakable serenity that made him question his actions. Buddha, with his infinite compassion, managed to transform Angulimala from a feared killer into a dedicated monk, demonstrating the power of Dharma to change even the hardest of hearts. Another notable example of Buddha's compassion was his forgiveness of Devadatta, his cousin who, driven by jealousy, tried several times to kill him. Even in the face of these attempts, Buddha maintained his equanimity and compassion, offering forgiveness and the opportunity for redemption. This story vividly illustrates the Buddhist teaching that hatred cannot be overcome by hatred, but only by love. Another notable example of Buddha's compassion was his forgiveness of Devadatta, his cousin who, driven by jealousy, tried several times to kill him. Even in the face of these attempts, Buddha maintained his equanimity and compassion, offering forgiveness and the opportunity for redemption. This story vividly illustrates the Buddhist teaching that hatred cannot be overcome by hatred, but only by love. In his final days at the age of 80, Buddha continued to teach, even while physically weakened. His last words to his disciples were, "All composed things are impermanent. Strive diligently for your liberation." This final teaching encapsulates the essence of the Dharma, the transient nature of all things, and the importance of personal effort in the pursuit of enlightenment. After Buddha's death, his teachings continued to spread, first throughout India and then across Asia. The dissemination of Buddhism was facilitated by Emperor Ashoka, who sent missionaries to various parts of the known world at the time. Over the centuries, Buddhism adapted to different cultures, giving rise to various schools and traditions, while always maintaining the core teachings of Buddha. Buddha's legacy remains alive today, not only through Buddhist religious institutions, but also through the influence of his teachings on contemporary philosophy, psychology, and mindfulness practices. His message of compassion, wisdom, and the pursuit of inner peace continues to resonate with millions of people around the world, transcending cultural and religious boundaries. Buddha's life as a teacher and his enduring legacy remind us that true transformation begins within ourselves, and that through diligent practice and compassion, we can not only change our own lives, but also positively impact the world around us.